Hello, you've joined us for the first episode of Hockey Talkies. Today is January 27th, 2021. We're about 2 weeks into the season, and what better time to do a season preview of the entire league. I'm Hunter, and I'm with Taylor here. And so we're going to run through all the teams in alphabetical order, so you know there's no bias at all. We don't even like any of these teams. We don't favor any teams above
I don't even
another.
like the alphabet.
I actually disagree with it. I disagree with its entire existence, and
But let's use it.
We'll use it anyway. Okay, so we're going to start with the Anaheim Ducks, first off the list here. How do you feel about the Anaheim Ducks, Taylor?
Well, obviously for the Ducks, it's a rebuilding year. I think that their fans have gone into the season knowing that they're it's gonna be pretty ugly, and they're in a tough division too with Vegas and St. Louis and Colorado.
Right.
So, the biggest bright spot right now, I would say, is John Gibson, and he's going to win them some games that they probably shouldn't, which maybe Ducks fans won't like, but they're still going to get a pretty nice draft pick at the end of the year, I think.
Yeah,
and they've got some really nice pieces with Zegras and Jamie Drysdale.
Yep.
So I mean, Zegras was incredible at the World Junior, right? So
yeah, he's become. I mean, he was drafted obviously as a top prospect, but. Like the World Junior Championship so often does, he's now been highlighted, kind of along with like Dylan Cousins, for example, as well. Sure. Suddenly become two of the hottest prospects in hockey. I would agree with you. I think John Gibson is going to be the difference between basically them being the cellar of the NHL, in the cellar of the NHL, and maybe like bottom five. That's kind of how I felt about them. Like, he didn't have a very good year last year if you look at the numbers, but I don't think I'll hold him responsible for that, and I think more of a product of the environment he's in, and I would expect him to have a better year. And I mean, he's definitely, as the team exists right now, John Gibson is their best asset.
We should mention that they are 3-2-2 to start the year, so it's not as if they're winless or something like that.
Well, that whole division, I was looking at that the other day, has enjoyed from the perspective of before the season started, an unprecedented level of balance. So you have Arizona at 2-4-1 at the bottom of the division. Obviously not a great record. But then you have, when you go right up to the top to Vegas, every team's played 7 games. Vegas has 5 wins. St. Louis, Colorado, Minnesota have 4. LA, Anaheim, San Jose have 3. And again, Coyotes at the bottom, but they're not exactly a huge ways behind. They're only 3 points out of a playoff spot as the as its top 4 in each division. So it's not an easy division per se, in the sense that none of the divisions in the NHL are easy. I looked at this division as certainly not as strong as, for example, the East Division, the Mass Mutual East Division.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, we should say it's not the West, it's the
Honda West.
The Honda West.
Oh. Yeah. But my projection, I definitely wouldn't have been surprised. I won't be surprised if the Anaheim Ducks finish at the bottom of that division in this season.
Do you think they might finish bottom of the league?
They're a decent candidate for that. I wouldn't call them outright the worst team in the NHL, guaranteed, but they are a candidate for 31st place. Yeah. I'll put it that way. Their offense is not particularly good. The days of Corey Perry and Ryan Getzlaf are long gone. Corey Perry literally not on the team anymore, of course, but Ryan Getzlaf definitely passed his prime. I mean, in terms of pros, like offense, it's their worst asset. They may be one of the worst offensive teams in the NHL, in all honesty. And on D, Shattenkirk is probably the strongest new asset that they have, and that's not saying a ton. Not to crap on Shattenkirk, but he's definitely he was a reclamation project for Tampa Bay that worked out very well, but he's not the Shattenkirk of 5 or 6 years ago.
Totally.
Yeah.
So next up is the Arizona Coyotes, who, as you mentioned, are 2-4-1 to start the year. One thing I did notice is their PK is decent, 81.5%. And their leading scorer is Connor Garland with 6 points. I think Kessel has 4 goals.
Oh, good for him.
Maybe, yeah.
Good for him.
So you really liked their goaltending tandem, though.
Yes. I mean, Darcy Kemper and Antti Ranta are as far as like goalie tandems go, it's a pretty solid 1-2 punch. And I mean, Kemper, before he got hurt last year, was in strong consideration for the Vezina Trophy. I think in the West, he was, in the opinion of many analysts, he was considered the best goalie in the Western Conference up to the moment he got hurt. And Antti Ranta's no slouch on backup either. I mean, he was their starter 2 years ago, and has generally played quite well when he's been healthy. He's had his own injury problems over the last several years as well. But certainly the Coyotes, I believe that they are the strongest part of the team, or at least the most stable, like the most reliable, is their goaltending.
Right.
Because their offense, while not exactly like volatile, like it's not like it's unpredictable, but it's not particularly strong. Like, I mean, Kessel is one example of a number of good players who have come to Arizona who just kind of lose their offensive spark once they join the team. I know that Clayton Keller too has kind of failed to live up to the expectations of his rookie year so far. I was actually
just about to say he's got to step up now because he's 22 or 23, and it's time for him to take the next step and really lead the team.
Yeah, I mean, like he's a guy who has to be like that first player that they've had in. I mean, I can't even think of. I mean, we've talked several weeks ago about how the Coyotes have a long, sad history of failed first round picks. Yeah. Like really, there's that organization has taken a lot of heat for its financial situation, for its GM controversies.
They may have upseeded Ottawa as being the biggest train wreck in the NHL from an organizational standpoint.
Yeah,
it's really unbelievable how, and it's easy to crap on the Coyotes and whatnot, but like some of the things that have happened with that team, whether you want to talk about the draft pick the guy that they picked.
Oh my God.
Who is just.
Well, that was like a cherry on top. Like they were going through all these other organizational issues with John Chayka, the combine controversy, and then him leaving the team, but also apparently like something about him violating the terms of his contract by talking to the folks in New Jersey or something like that.
Really strange.
I mean, it's ridiculous. And then they went and drafted a racist late in last year's draft. They're just like, they could have picked anybody.
I thought he was like a fourth rounder though.
Yeah, he wasn't like. I guess by late, I mean like he wasn't that high of a pick, and there were, I'm sure hundreds of kids available to pick from, and they picked the Arizona Coyotes of all the teams, out of all the players they could have picked that guy. I don't even remember his name. Who really cares anyway? But the Coyotes, I think they could squeeze in. I think they could squeeze into the playoffs. There's, it's a tough division, but if they're stingy enough,
I think Vegas, St. Louis, Colorado are all ahead of them, so they're fighting pretty much everyone else.
Yeah, for the fourth
spot.
But there are some weak teams. I mean, like, I would rank by default Arizona ahead of Los Angeles, Anaheim, and San Jose. I'm not as sold on their crappiness, so to speak. We can get more into that later in the list, but they're a little bit of a wild card in my opinion. But LA and Anaheim are, I think, quite confidently in that bottom portion of the division.
All right. So next up, the Boston Bruins. Who are off to a 4-1-1 start. They started a little bit rough, I think, losing a couple games, but have since rebounded. And I mean, they've been led by their big stars. Marchand has 9 points. Bergeron's been good for them. They have, I think, the best penalty kill in the league in the first 2 weeks of the season. So, to me, I think they're a cup contender.
I agree.
Yeah.
For Boston, there was a lot of questions this offseason about, they lost Chara, they lost Krug, and they didn't replace those assets directly with, they certainly didn't fill that void with an equivalent. And I think that naturally created questions, or the Bruins the same team that they were last year? I think that you can still safely consider them to be among the better teams in the league. Maybe if we rewind a year, they're more of a guaranteed contender a year ago, but I still consider them, like, I have them at the top of the division, of the strongest division in the NHL. I have them winning that division. That's my prediction. I think that they have probably the best first line in hockey in Brad Marchand, Patrice Bergeron, and David Pastrnak, who, of course, is, I believe, currently injured. But, once they get him back...
Pastrnak, they suspect is going to be back in mid-February-ish.
That's not even that long from now. So,
no.
Yeah. And once they have him back, that's like... I mean, it's not like they're struggling right now, totally. And once they have him back, that line is going to be firing all cylinders, I'm sure. I think the only question for Boston is their future. which we're not talking about here anyway. Like here and now, I think they're still one of the best teams in the league. Their goaltending tandem is very steady. You got Tuukka Rask and
Yaroslav Halak, who's played quite well actually so far this year. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think Boston is just as usual over the last 10 or so years will be in contention for the Stanley Cup. Yeah,
I agree.
So next up we have a team that is, in my opinion, one of the dark horses of the year in the Buffalo Sabres. Mm-hmm. They're off to a 3-1-1 start. Obviously, the big thing with the Sabres this offseason was that they acquired Taylor Hall to go along with Jack Eichel as their top forwards. So what do you think about the Sabres' odds? I think the biggest issue for the Sabres is the division that they're in, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
They are very unfortunately placed in the strongest division in the NHL. That's my opinion, of course, but I know a lot of people have talked about the North Division, but I think that the East Division is definitely the strongest. And Buffalo, I think it was impressive, them adding Hall. They want to be gamers this year, for sure. But I just don't think that on the whole that they'll be able to withstand what the other teams in this division can. Like, they're off to a good start, which is awesome for them. But the goaltending, I don't envision holding up over the course of the year unless Ullmark suddenly discovers the ability to be a really good first starting goalie. Carter Hutton, who was never particularly good, has certainly demonstrated in recent times that he's not really reliable even as a pretty good backup goalie. I won't say that the goaltending is definitely going to be bad, but it's not a guaranteed success for them in any way, shape, or form.
And one of the weird things that you brought up to me a little while ago was the relationship between Eric Stahl and Jeff Skinner.
Yeah, so I learned about that recently, and obviously, we're not journalists, so that we didn't come up with this information ourselves through sources. This is just like something you can look up yourself. But I have heard, apparently, that when they played in Carolina together, they didn't get along all that well.
There was friction.
Or at least they just didn't gel as line mates at the very least. Like, there wasn't a lot of chemistry between the two of them. And yeah, apparently they're not good buddies. And so, the Buffalo Sabres, like you do, spent a lot of money on Jeff Skinner last year. Taylor's shaking his head over here.
It's probably one of the worst contracts in the NHL, in my opinion.
And I know you're not just saying that because of how it's looked so far.
No. At the time, yeah. I was blown away that a team would give Jeff Skinner. I mean, after he had a great season that 1 year.
It's 8 years by $9 million, right?
That's like a lot of money for a guy who started the season on the fourth line.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Don't even get me started on that. Oh, my goodness.
So, I think the Sabres, I appreciate the fact they went big game hunting in getting Taylor Hall, if only for 1 year, but the division that they're in is going to make it pretty difficult for them to do a lot of damage, I think.
I respect that effort. I respect getting Taylor Hall because, this is a team that's been rebuilding technically for about 9 years, and I think the fans' ownership, they're sick of the constant losing. They want to start getting some wins. Like, even if it doesn't mean playoffs, if they can be competitive in the division, I think that would help quite a bit. Like, if they look like a good team.
If they miss the playoffs this year, they tie the record for longest playoff drought, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Because the last time they were in the playoffs was 2011.
And they're trying to build... I believe they lost to the Flyers in 7 games. And, this is a team that's trying to build some kind of core, some kind of future success around their star center in Jack Eichel, who is a spectacular player and really demonstrated that he's ready to take the next step next year. I mean, he took the next step next year. I think he can go even further. I think he's a terrific, terrific player.
And to me, he doesn't seem like he has a lot of patience.
No,
right? In terms of winning.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is a guy that wants to win right now, and then people joke about GM Jack Eichel, but far be it for me to say that, he's going to demand a trade or something like that. But, if they continually miss the playoffs, if they continually, seems like there's no hope on the horizon.
Yeah.
At some point, maybe something does happen.
Yeah. I mean, they're obviously banking to some degree on something happening this season because I don't know if Taylor Hall's going to want to resign after this year. And again, the cap...
I would suspect not.
The economy, the economic situation with COVID plays a bit of a role in that as well. I mean, that's the reason why he's not currently on a 7-year contract with some team somewhere. But assuming Hall walks, they've got to start thinking about what they're going to have after that for sure. But evidently they're hoping to have some success right now. My prediction for them is I have them at 7th in that division. The East has 8 teams in it. They could be as high as 5th, I suppose. I don't know. It's a bit of a toss up in there.
Well, that's why I had them as a dark horse, because they could fight for a playoff spot.
I think if their goaltending ends up being decent, then that helps all that much more. Like if they don't have to worry about whether or not their goalies can keep the puck out of the net, then all the better chance of them being a dark horse.
All right, so the next team at 2-2-1 is the Calgary Flames, who made some adjustments in the offseason.
Yeah.
They picked up some guys.
Picked up a couple of players.
Picked up about a third of our roster of a divisional opponent.
Yeah. How do you feel about the Calgary Flames this year?
I think the biggest thing is Jacob Markstrom. Mm-hmm. And he's that's a legit starter. And they put a lot of money they put a lot of term towards a guy who's 30, I believe.
Yep, he's 30.
So, I think that the Flames, the biggest thing for them is can their star guys, Gaudreau and Monahan, get it done in the playoffs, right? Because I think they're a playoff team. Most people would agree with that. Yeah. It's a matter of what can they do in the playoffs. And, if you look at what happened against Colorado a couple of years ago after they finished first in the West, look at what happened last year against the Stars. It's been pretty disappointing for them. So for me, it's not so much the regular season. It's can they get it done in the playoffs. Yeah,
I agree. And I personally I think the Flames, though, like you said, most people consider them to be a playoff team. I think a lot of people are going to underrate them based on how a lot of the players played last year. But, I think it's dangerous to underrate the Flames especially because Monahan and Gaudreau underachieved so much, both in the playoffs and in the regular season last year. That makes them good candidates to bounce back, and they're good players. So, why wouldn't they, at least to some extent? Maybe Gaudreau won't ever get back to the 99-point range that he had the year before last. But, I would expect him to get back up to around point per game for sure. And Monahan, I think, is last year, I think he had around, it was again shortened season or postponed season, but I think he finished with around a 50-ish point pace.
And they both have 7 points in their first 5 games.
That's pretty good.
It's a good start.
I think Monahan is, by default, should be considered a 30-30 guy in a full season. And I think his career average is pretty close to that. Tkachuk is also I used the word gamer earlier, which is something I hear Ray Ferraro say a lot when he talks about good players. But Tkachuk's a gamer. That guy really pisses me off, for the record, when I watch him play. But that is exactly why. Every time I get
and
angry,
the fans of 30 other teams.
Exactly. Every time I watch him play and he makes me angry, I think that's him succeeding one more time right there. Literally.
Well, even the other night against the Leafs, you saw what happened, where he fell on top of, was it Hutchison?
Jack Campbell.
Or Jack Campbell. Just dropped on top of his head. And the game last night, there didn't seem to be a whole lot of pushback against Tkachuk until Muzzin shot
a puck at
him. And he didn't really shoot it at him. He just kind of flipped it at him. Whereas, 5 or 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago, someone would have just taken Tkachuk's head off. Yeah. Right? Which is, that's kind of besides the point, but...
he... And again, you can compare his reaction to Jake Muzzin shooting the puck at him, where he totally flipped out. You can compare that with how he reacted when he was up in the press box against Dallas when he was hurt. This is a guy who really wants to win. He really cares about it. I think Tkachuk's the one guy on that team that's not a question mark. I think that is a guy that's going to produce. He's not going to have any trouble. And when they do make the playoffs, because I think they will, he's going to be a huge part of that. Getting Markstrom, and again, I didn't want the Canucks to sign Markstrom to a long-term contract. That doesn't apply similarly to how the Flames approach that. I think it was a good signing for the Flames because goaltending is something that they needed, in my opinion. They let Talbot go. But, they don't have a goalie on the horizon. David Rittich is pretty average. He was given a lot of responsibility last year. I think he's a good backup goalie who can play a decent number of games, which is not even as required with Markstrom on the team because that guy just logs minutes. He's going to play most of the games.
He's played every game so far.
Yeah, and he's been very good. His numbers are excellent. That's a big help for the Flames. If they get 3 really good years out of Markstrom, then that contract is a
You
success.
think that it's yeah.
And again, well, goalies tend to prime later anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think the Flames are, they'll challenge for the division, and they haven't had any success in the playoffs in the last couple of years, but I don't want to count them out. And this could be that year where all that potential is discovered and they figure it out. But it could be a first or second round exit as well.
Next team is the 2-1-0 Carolina Hurricanes, who have missed some games due to COVID protocols. So it's hard to get a really good read on the Canes because of that. However, I think this is a team that are they Stanley Cup contenders? Maybe not quite, but I think that they're a team that, assuming that they do make the playoffs, they could probably do some damage.
Yeah, I agree. I think they've got a really good sort of like team structure. I'm a fan of Rod Brind'Amour as coach as well. That sounds like that's the dressing room that, from some of the footage people have seen of Brind'Amour talking to them. I think they buy into like what he's selling. It's a good roster too. I think they have a really good defensive core with Dougie Hamilton, Jacob Slavin. I don't know. It's like some good offense coming from that point, and then Jacob Slavin, of course, is kind of like become the poster child for what a good two-way defenseman is supposed to be in today's NHL. Good skater, good puck mover, keeps the puck out of the net. Guy is getting some Norris looks, even though he's not producing at the level of some of the more traditional Norris winners of the past several decades, I suppose. But he's getting recognition now for what he brings to the table for the Canes. Yeah, so I think they could do some damage in the playoffs.
And they already have. Right, a couple of years ago, they
did,
were in the Eastern Conference Final, so they have a little bit of experience there.
I like their odds in this division too.
Yeah.
It's a good, and again, there are no bad divisions really that we have here, but it's a good division. But I like their odds against. Tampa Bay is kind of the cream of the crop, but I like them against Dallas, Columbus, Florida, Nashville, Chicago, Detroit. I think Carolina is as good or better than all of those.
Where'd you have them?
I have them second, actually.
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah. Only problem is in net, I'd say. Mrazek is pretty inconsistent. Reimer is just kind of like steadily average or above average. They don't have a game stealer in net, which most contending teams need. That's probably what's separating them from being a contender, is having a legit number one goalie.
Right.
I think they considered going after Markstrom. There was some talk about that. It didn't really go anywhere for them.
So next up are the Chicago Blackhawks at 2-3-3. For the Blackhawks, I think they're going through kind of somewhat of a rebuilding phase, kind of rebuilding on the fly, I think is the idea.
That's not how it's going to look, but because they're going to be really bad this year. If you asked me 2 months ago, I wouldn't have been as blunt about it when Jonathan Taves and Kirby Dach were both supposed to be in the lineup. They don't even have those two guys.
Right.
Patrick Kane's going to be doing it all on his own offensively. Hopefully DeBrincat figures it out again.
Well, the big question mark for them, not even really a question mark. It's pretty obvious, is the goaltending is really bad.
They have simply decided not to have NHL caliber starting goaltending. Not to slag off Malcolm Subban and Colin Delia, and there's a third guy as well who's suddenly come into the mix there
Kevin Lankinen.
Yeah, and again, like I hope, for their sake, I hope that they have solid years. And Subban is a former first round pick, and this is his. I can't remember if I was telling you about this or if I was talking to someone else, Taylor, but this is Subban's kind of like last chance to prove that he can be a starter in the NHL, basically, or at least a good backup. Because he hasn't really demonstrated either of those things consistently. This isn't a great situation for him to prove it, but he will be given ample opportunity.
Yeah.
He was pretty good the other night against, I think they lost in overtime to Nashville. Give up 2 goals on, I think, close to 40 shots.
And they lost tonight as well, actually.
Right.
To Nashville.
Yeah. I don't know if he was in net for that, but yeah, the Hawks are going to be racking up the L's.
Well, and Kane you mentioned, which is the obvious one, and then also Alex DeBrincat as well.
Yeah.
Will have to carry the offensive load. And especially with Jonathan Taves out for reasons that we don't quite know.
Mm-hmm. I haven't gotten any update on that.
No.
I'm not really sure what's going on there. But
so, and then obviously losing Kirby Dach in the World Juniors
that really sucks for them.
Oh, big time, because he's I think can be a star for the Hawks eventually. So
I would imagine for most Hawks fans, that was one of the most exciting things about this season.
Sure.
Was seeing Kirby Dach take a larger role on the team. But that's going to have to wait till next season, unfortunately.
with a kind of a freak injury.
They, because of the injuries that they've had, they are probably, I mean, they might be the strongest candidate for last place, actually. Even when you factor in Detroit after the season they had last year.
League-wise or just in...
Possibly league-wise. Definitely bottom of the division. They're definitely, in my opinion, going to be bottom of this division, but they're a great candidate for 31st.
All right. The next team are the Colorado Avalanche, who I believe are going to be Stanley Cup contenders. I know I'm going out on a limb there. I actually
Pretty risky. You should put some money down on that.
I'm thinking about it. They 4-3-0 start. But yeah, the Avs are, I think, along with teams that we'll get to later on, are in the conversation as being in the top 3 probably for Stanley Cup contenders.
This is a team that a year ago I would be referring to as a Stanley Cup contender, and then they added Brandon Saad and I believe Devon Taves as well. Like they literally just added more players last year, basically. If they don't win the cup, it'll be a disappointment for them, for sure.
Which is saying a lot in a 31-team league.
Yes. I would expect them, from a reasonable point of view, I would expect them to get to at least the third round. We can't really call it the conference final. I instinctively want to call it that, but it's not what it is.
It's technically not a conference final.
Yeah, it's like from this point, I'm sure they'll have a nice nickname for it. A couple months from now, I'm calling it the third round, especially since there's no preliminaries this year. If they don't at least get that far, it is objectively a disappointment.
Right.
But if they don't win the cup, I know that they'll be pretty choked, because that's their goal, and they have all the pieces to do it. Although I'm not a huge fan of the goaltending, from a contending team standpoint, they don't have.
You don't think Grubauer has?
I think Grubauer's a good goalie. He's just not. He's not a guaranteed. And again, I've said that word a couple times, I think, in this episode so far. But he's not a Tuukka Rask, for example, or a. I don't know. He's not a Carey Price. Even Carey Price has ups and downs. He's not a he's definitely not a Vasilevsky. He's a solid goalie. He's had some injury problems. If he gets hurt, which has happened already for them, then they're in a little bit of trouble. Pavel Francouz, I think I'm pronouncing the name correctly, was pretty solid for them last year. He's currently hurt, although I don't think it's a long-term injury. I think he's day-to-day.
Okay.
But, that's it. That's, all the proof he's given that he's a solid goalie is just some play from last year.
Nathan MacKinnon's had a pretty good start for the Avs, too.
Yes. Nathan MacKinnon is...
He's decent.
I mean, according to the Hockey News, he is the number 1 player in the NHL going to this
season. Okay, enough of that.
I mean, he's definitely he's top 2. Not everybody would say that automatically, but I think it's Connor McDavid, Nathan MacKinnon, and then the rest of the league, in my opinion. I'd say.
That's fair.
Not that that's by a huge margin necessarily, but it's those 2 guys and everyone else.
Right.
And he's an electrifying player to watch.
He is. He's one of the most exciting players in the league.
Worth the price of admission. Right off the bat, regardless of whether or not Colorado wins a game.
And then, of course, Makar as well is a year older, right? Which he was outstanding as a rookie.
Yes.
And now you're getting him a year older.
It's like free, cheap, elite labor. I don't know how to describe it. The guy makes, the entry level kind. It's so great when you get a rookie that can just do something like that, because he's paid chump change to be elite. And I mean, what more can the Avs ask for right now than cheap elite talent to help support their bid for a cup?
Exactly.
And, I mean, he's not the only one. There's also Bowen Byram.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I believe he's been playing this year. And I mean, we're talking about this season, but they've also got Alex Newhook waiting in the wings. This is a blessed team.
They're going to be stacked for a while.
I think so.
They're going to be in the conversation for a long time.
Yeah. Which is great. Good for them.
All right, and another team that has added a player recently, one of the more interesting teams so far this season is the Columbus Blue Jackets.
Yes.
Who are 2-2-3, and most importantly for the Jackets right now is they're waiting on the arrival of their new, hopefully for them, star player, in Patrick Laine in what was one of the biggest trades in recent memory, I would think.
In terms of an asset for like a player for player trade, the last thing I can think of that comes to mind.
Well, there were other parts of that deal too.
Yeah, but Roslovic went as well. But in terms of like one good player going for another good player, as opposed to like one good player going for draft picks, the last thing I can think of is like Subban for Weber. It's the last thing that comes to mind of that scale. Right.
That was a massive trade, and it wasn't like it was out of left field, because there had been discussions obviously about
like the Dubois Laine trade. You mean?
Yeah. Yeah, so, but just to see it actually go down was like, it was not shocking, but it was pretty amazing.
I had been hearing so much talk about how Kekalainen was prepared to wait it out with Dubois. Like, there was almost this impression that they were prepared, like if they couldn't get a deal that they wanted, to let him ride the pine for weeks, which I thought was really weird. And
with Dubois.
Yeah, I didn't buy that.
Well, and I remember having this discussion with you last week when we're talking about Dubois' last shift, what ended up being his last shift as a Blue Jacket. That to me, like, I understand if you're a young guy like Dubois, 22, 23 years old, and it's not working, you want to trade, whatever, that you request a trade. But to me, that showing was pretty disgraceful, actually.
It was a bad shift.
Like, that's how, as a pro athlete and as someone who should take pride in their work, that's what you're going to do to make sure that you get out of Columbus or something. I mean, I guess it worked because he got traded.
Yeah.
He was benched for the rest of the game. He played 4 minutes that game and was gone the next day or 2 days later. I was really turned off by that. As someone who does like Dubois and thinks he's going to be a star, and you know, I do wish him the best in Winnipeg and everything. I was kind of disappointed in that sort of behavior, and maybe I'm looking too much into it, but it just seemed like very petty almost.
Well, plenty of guys ask to be traded and don't play like that,
right?
Like, and in fact, quite frequently, most guys, they'll ask to be traded, but they'll still wear their heart in their sleeve because it benefits. I mean, partly because it benefits them, because it's like you still want to demonstrate that you're a good asset, right? Like, but also it's just like there's a respect thing there where, you know, you're paid by a team to perform, to do your job, so you should do it. It was a bad shift. In terms of the whole Dubois story, I think there's some stuff going on there that we don't know, and we're not going to be told. We
probably will never know.
We might never know. Yeah, Dubois has made it pretty clear he's not going to go into detail. Kekalainen as well. No more detail than Torts already went to, where, and again, we were just talking about how Torts is one of those guys, he always likes to play coy with the media, but when he wants to be, he'll be like the most candid
pretty
coach
direct
in the NHL.
Yep.
He likes to be, he'll literally call guys out in the media, and he definitely did that with Dubois. I think it's a cool trade. I think personally, I like Columbus in that deal. I like them getting Laine.
Yeah.
It sucks to lose a good center, but I think they got the better player, and they got Roslovic too, who apparently they're going to be giving a pretty good shot at center as well. Bit of a disgruntled player and two disgruntled players.
So one of the most interesting aspects of this trade, in my opinion, is what is Patrick Laine's relationship going to be with John Tortorella?
Yeah.
And I think it's either going to be they're going to hit a home run and it's going to be a perfect relationship, and these two kind of opposite guys are going to come together, or it's going to be the Titanic. I think it's going to be either one or the other.
I'm inclined to agree.
Yeah. And I am ready for it. I want to see what's going to happen. Fun.
I have a lot of respect for Columbus, actually, in their willingness
they've lost so many stars.
Yeah. So they acquired Duchesne partway through that one season, but they already had Panarin and Bobrovsky, all three of them gone months later. And they were pretty much just as good the next season in terms of like their record. I think a lot of that has to do with Tortorella being a coach that the players buy into. I think he's got them on a whatever you can envision that Torts is doing, a disciplined system, I suppose, if you could describe it that way. We don't really know what's going on, literally like face to face between players and coach. We never know that. We don't know those things, and they like to keep those things secret, obviously. But I think they buy into what Torts is selling.
Oh.
And it's a balanced, tight group of guys. Like, there's no clear-cut superstar if we're not counting the fact that Laine is about to join the team. But they all play real solid hockey. There's some good defensemen on that team. Korpisalo and Merzlikins are two pretty solid goalies, I think.
They're an easy team to cheer for, I think.
Yeah.
Like, they're an easy team to like.
I think they've been well managed, apart from their inability to retain big assets. but their ability to kind of like persevere and succeed in
hey,
spite of that.
That's not like, and no offense to Columbus, I've never been to Columbus. I'd like to go someday, and I don't mean to disparage the city at all, but losing Panarin to New York City, yeah, I can see how a guy like Panarin would want the bright lights of Broadway.
Yeah.
Losing Bobrovsky to Florida. I mean, he's not the first Russian to enjoy the sunny weather in down in FLA. So
they are literally enjoying the longest string of success they've ever had as a franchise right now. I think that's one thing when people think about like they're worried about whether or not they'll be able to keep up the good play. Look at where they are right now. Compare it to where they were for literally the first 13 years of their existence. Yeah. This has been a successful, stable team that wins games. This will be I think the 5th season in a row where this is a playoff team and a pretty good playoff team. I think they'll make the playoffs for sure. As to where I had them in the division, right in the mix. I mean, Tampa, Carolina, Dallas, Columbus are my picks in that division, and I don't see why Columbus can't be in there again.
All right, and speaking of the Dallas Stars, who are 3-0. They're the next team that we're going to talk about. The Stars didn't start the season until January 19th because I think all of their players had COVID. Or it was like 17 of their players, if I'm not mistaken.
And that answers, again, just to interject, there's been some talk about like, okay, why does our team still have to play when we have guys on COVID, but Dallas didn't have to play? It's like because the entire Dallas Stars team is ill, so it's different.
They all actually had it.
It's not just the Russian superstar.
Oh, we'll get to
the town.
We'll get to the Russian 4.
Yeah.
Detroit had the Russian 5. Washington has the Russian 4. But no, Dallas. So while they didn't start for about a week into the season, they are 3-0. They, I think, destroyed Nashville a few nights ago, 7-1 or 7-0.
Yeah.
And so Joe Pavelski has had a really hot start. And look, I mean, these are the defending Western Conference champions, right? This is a good hockey team.
Yeah.
And they have a power play, and it's only 3 games in, mind you, but they have a power play percentage of 56.2.
That's got to be the best ever.
I think that's going to drop down a little bit.
Probably a little.
But Dallas, I think, is right in the mix in that division.
Yep. Well, the power play was actually a strength of theirs last year, surprisingly, because the team on the whole did not score a ton of goals. But the power play, I think, was where they found the key to winning games from an offensive perspective. I think that their goaltending is good, obviously. Bishop is currently hurt, which is, a tradition.
Yeah, sounds about right.
But Hudobin, I mean, they're obviously not worried about Hudobin's play.
Hudobin has been amazing through 3 games.
Yeah.
And took him to the Stanley Cup final last year.
And he was really solid in those playoff runs. In that playoff run, his stats didn't look really great in those playoffs, but he had a really good season before, and he had a .915 save percentage, I think, in the playoffs, which is good. That's a good stat to have. He's not a spring chicken, but certainly this year they're not worried about that at all. That's not a question mark for them in net. And of course, on D, they've got Heiskanen and Klingberg, wul are 2 spectacular defensemen. Klingberg, maybe a little underrated, actually.
He had a nice goal the other night.
Yeah. But Heiskanen is, one of these future young defensive stars that we've been talking about.
Alongside, maybe not right alongside Makar and Hughes, but if he's not at that level, he's just below.
His playoff performance...
He was amazing.
Was incredible.
He was amazing in the playoffs.
I think for a lot of people that has put him up there with them. I think, he hasn't had the same regular season success as they have had, and I know a lot of people think that's sacrilege. It's but he was so good in the playoffs. Yeah. But he hasn't demonstrated the close to point per game play that the other 2 guys have demonstrated yet. At least not over a whole season. But I think that will be a normal for him.
All right, so next team up to go from one team that might be contending for a Stanley Cup to a team that might be contending for 31st is the Detroit Red Wings.
Yeah,
they are 2-4-1, and this is not going to be a year where they do anything particularly special. They're going to be the Dead Wings again.
So when I did pros and cons for this team on my little notes here, my first note is it can't get any worse. That's just basically the first thing I said. I don't think they'll be as cataclysmically awful as last year. I mean that in a very literal sense. I just don't think they will literally be as
last year
terrible
was
as last year.
was amazingly bad.
Yeah, they're still going to be really, really bad, but just not. I don't think they can be as bad as they were last year. It was just terrible. I think they're thankful the season ended when it did.
They're thankful for the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, COVID-19, Detroit Red Wings. The first line is decent though. Like it's worth watching. You've got Larkin and Mantha, who are
the new
Larkin,
captain.
Yeah, new captain Dylan Larkin, who had a bit of an off year last year, but I think that's an aberration, even on a bad Red Wings team. Him and Mantha are solid players. I think Philip Zadina will be a player to watch this year as well. I think there's a young player that people are going to overlook because of where he's playing, Detroit, but also because he didn't make the NHL like right off the bat. I think he's a future star, personally. I think he's got I've watched a lot of clips of him, and I think he's got an elite release, and I think he's going to be a really good player. So he's got to watch. But what's wrong with Detroit?
Well, what's right with Detroit? Let's maybe start there.
I think what I just said is it. That's what's right with Detroit. That's all that Dylan Larkin, Anthony Mantha, and Philip Zadina.
Yeah, Detroit. Look, this is obviously a transition period for them. Clearly, I mean, they made the playoffs. So I think it was 25 straight years,
something like that.
So quarter century of success. Obviously, that's a pretty big peak. So they're going through a valley now.
Yeah, they're still hungover.
Yeah. And hey, I mean, they got 4 cups out of that run, right?
Yep.
So they had a ton of success. And so I can't speak for Red Wings fans, but I think that, there has to be some acknowledgement. Like, yeah, it's gonna be rough for a while.
Well, look who's leading. Look who's at the helm.
Right. Steve Yzerman. There's some guy named Stevie Y, who was the former captain of that team, who's now moved back to Detroit after putting together a powerhouse in Tampa Bay.
I was thinking the other day, it kind of disturbs me that he's not involved with that cup win though. Like he doesn't get his name on the cup. I mean, obviously this is a man who's won 3 Stanley Cups in his own day, but he's not on that cup for that Tampa team that he built. It kind of chills me a little bit actually.
It is unfortunate. I mean, he made the decision to go to Detroit.
Yeah, so. It was an opportunity for him. I don't really blame him actually if it's something that he's wanted to do. I mean, I'm assuming that Steve Yzerman didn't see that opportunity when Ken Holland was the GM of the Red Wings. He didn't envision himself becoming GM, but of course, Holland left.
The prodigal son returned.
Exactly. So bright future for Detroit, I'm sure. Greiss in net isn't a terrible person to have in net, especially like Bernier did a respectable job last year. Howard was awful. Jimmy Howard, he's not playing this year, I don't think.
No.
Greiss is a solid goalie. He had his ups and downs in New York, especially when they weren't very good defensively. He also struggled, and now he's in Detroit, so we'll see how that goes. Anyway, it's a team in transition. Good candidate for last place. Certainly bottom 5.
All right, the next team up is the disappointing, to this point, 3-5 Edmonton Oilers. So the Oilers have obviously have aspirations of being near the top of the North Division. And so far it hasn't really worked out as they'd like to.
Well, you've watched a few of their games, right? So you can probably elaborate on what their problems are right now.
Yeah, so they have a few problems. The first of which is that they had 3 NHL caliber goaltenders at the start of the year, and then within the span of about 24 hours they had 1. So they put Anton Forsberg on waivers with the purpose of putting him onto the taxi squad. And then Carolina claimed him. And then Mike Smith got injured. And then they were left with Mikko Koskinen, who has played all 8 games for the Oilers thus far. And has been okay some games, not great other games. So that's obviously a big issue for them. And another thing is some of the coaching decisions that Dave Tippett has made have been pretty questionable. Guys that he's put in the lineup, guys he's taken out of the lineup. One thing Oiler fans were screaming about last night was the score was against the Jets was 5-3. McDavid scored with 90 seconds left, I think. And Tippett didn't take a timeout and put the third line out there. And so the top line didn't get a chance to...
Sorry, he didn't call a timeout, and then he did put the third line out.
Yeah, the Oilers scored. Tippett didn't call a timeout. Put the third line out with 90 seconds or so left, and then pulled the goaltender. So McDavid was out there, but Draisaitl and Nuge didn't get a chance to get the tying goal. And so that's just kind of a microcosm of some of the weird decisions that he's made. And then I think probably the thing that's been talked about at nauseum the most is the power play, which is, I mean, the special teams were the bread and butter for the Oilers last year. Had a great penalty kill, had a historically good power play. Mm-hmm. And the power play, it hasn't been great. They need to produce more. And there should be no excuse to produce more. I mean, they had Clefbaum was quarterbacking the power play last year. Obviously, he's out for the whole year. And so they brought in Tyson Barrie, who's been pretty underwhelming. And that could just be a lack of chemistry thus far and guys getting used to one another. But, I mean, you have McDavid, Draisaitl, Nuge on that unit. I mean, they should be producing near the top of the league, and they just haven't done that so far.
On paper, it's like the best first power play unit in the NHL, really. Right. Like in terms of pure offensive output. They don't have much of an excuse. If it's been so poor to start, you have to think that just has to turn around at some point. Like it's unsustainable for it to be that poor.
Well, it's 17.9%, which is 19th in the league.
Yeah, that's not terrible, but it's certainly not acceptable.
But the Oilers, like I said, the reason that they've been. The reason that they finished second in the Pacific last year was largely due to special teams. So they need the power play. And they were also really bad 5-on-5 last year.
Right.
So they need the power play to be a lot better. Right. But there are some, I think the probably one of the biggest bright spots is the play of Kyler Yamamoto thus far, who's been just kind of continued what he did last year, which is like he's obviously undersized, but very tenacious. I guess you could just call him a feisty player, and he's really talented.
I noticed him big time in those first two games against Vancouver. I mean, he scored in the first one. I don't quite remember his output over the course of those two games, but he's a guy that I kept seeing him in those first two games, for sure. He's a presence. I like what I liked about what they did in the offseason. They shored up their secondary scoring a bit by getting like Cahoon's a solid player, but Turris as well. You know, obviously, kind of like his tag now is he was bought out by Nashville, but that guy produced at a 40-point pace last year, which wasn't good for the money he's making, but it's good for the money he's making now in Edmonton, and like that's a good option.
He only has the one goal through 8 games, though. Unfortunately,
a good start, I guess.
I think there have also been some. Lineup decisions that Tippett's made that have been questionable, like the top line of Nuge, McDavid, and Cassian wasn't working, and he finally put Puljujarvi on the top line in place of Cassian, and Puljujarvi's looked great in the last 2 games, and they seem to be kind of shoehorning Cahoon to be on the second line left winger to play with Draisaitl, which I don't know if there's that much chemistry there. So a lot of people have just been saying reunite the Nuge, Draisaitl, Yamamoto line. But I mean 3-5-0. No disrespect to Ottawa, but the Oilers haven't played Ottawa yet. Well, it's like Vancouver, right? Vancouver was 2-5-0. Now they're 4-5-0 with a chance to go back to 500, right? So. We'll see what happens once the Oilers play the Sens next week, but
maybe that's the medicine that Edmonton needs, some Ottawa.
So,
I do have them making the playoffs. I'm not sure how far they'd go. I like I said, I was kind of singing Calgary's praises. I personally consider Calgary to be sort of a deeper team, like a better team. But I think the two of them will be like right in the top 4 for sure. So next up, we have the Florida Panthers.
They're a team that's been kind of screwed by teams getting COVID because I don't believe there's been any positive cases on the Panthers. But they've only played 3 games because Dallas and Carolina were on their schedule. And so they are 3-0, though. They're one of the only undefeated teams. They're next to Dallas. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, their schedule has been delayed. So the 3 wins, fantastic. Bobrovsky hasn't looked particularly great, but still does have 2 wins for them.
Yep.
So I mean, it's a big year, I think, for Bobrovsky after the rough start he had to that huge contract that the Panthers gave him.
He simply has to be better. Like there's, without getting ad hominem about it, he was garbage last year. Like, he was just, for the money he was making, that was absolutely inexcusable. It was terrible. And that needs to not happen this year. Again, so winning helps. Like, again, like you said, the numbers don't look great so far, but he's literally had 2 starts. So
Yeah.
For the team's sake, certainly, because I mean, he's making the money one way or another. He turns his game around. I like them offensively. I mean, that is their calling card, is like the players they have up front, even though they lost Hoffman and Dadonov.
They did add Duclair.
Yeah, they got Duclair. I like that addition because that was really cheap, and apparently he's going to get some first line looks, and I think he's got 2 points in those first 3 games so far, which isn't bad.
4 actually.
Yeah. Oh wow, good for him. Holy shit.
So, at 3-2-2, we have the Los Angeles Kings, who are another California team who's kind of rebuilding, which is difficult to do with some of the contracts that they have, obviously. And of the players with those massive contracts, Anze Kopitar has looked very, very good for them, with 10 points in those 7 games.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And he's a guy who, his point totals kind of fluctuate year by year, but he's a pretty reliable producer in general. You can usually count on him for at least 60 points. Doughty's still a good player. He's making a lot of money, but he's still a good defenseman. I think Jonathan Quick has a little bit of gas left in the tank, but again, team in transition. Those are the old guys on the team, so to speak, and they're looking at the future. They picked up some good draft picks. Slow and steady rebuild for them, I think. I'd have them near the bottom of the division.
Yeah.
I don't think they're as bad as Anaheim, but they're down there.
They're not going to be making the playoffs this year.
No.
So next up, we go to the state of hockey, Minnesota Wild, who are 4-3-0 to start the year, which is, I would say, a pretty strong start for the Wild.
It is.
Considered.
I mean, Kaprizov is a pretty exciting player for them to have. I think Cam Talbot, I think, was a good pickup for them because goaltending was no strength last year. Stalock was respectable, but Dubnyk was terrible. Talbot had a pretty solid year last year, so he was a good pickup. I think it's status quo for them. They're going to be that same like decent playoff team that they've generally been over the past like 6 or 7 years. Fiala was a pretty good addition. He's off to a slow start, but I mean, he was terrific for them last year, and I would expect him to pick up where he left off.
Where do you have them ranked?
In that division, I have them squeaking in at 4th. We were talking about Arizona earlier. I think they're in that like 3-4-5 area. Actually, more like 4-5, I should say, because I think, like we were saying before, Colorado, Vegas, and St. Louis, I think have those 3 spots locked up. Yeah. Vegas will be a great contender for that 4th spot. And they could be a pain in the ass to play in the playoffs as well. I mean, if those 4 teams all make it in, there's going to be some disappointment guaranteed. Somebody's going to lose earlier than they should because of how many good teams there are in the top 4.
All right. Next up, the Montreal Canadiens, who are very surprising, I would say, 4-0-2. So it's been obviously a really good start for them. Good start for Carey Price as well. And the player perhaps who's raised the most eyebrows would be Tyler Toffoli, a new addition.
God save me.
He had a hat trick against the Canucks.
Yes, he did. I think the 4-0-2 start is surprising, but I did expect them to be a pretty good team this year. I mean, they had some great additions, definitely competitive additions, born out of a desire to win some more games. Jake Allen was a good pickup. There's a lot of money invested in the goaltending on that team, but it's good goaltending. So, the Josh Anderson risk is paying off so far for them. I mean, it's an 8-year contract that he's just begun, but that was a bold move by Bergevin. To sign a guy who scored 1 goal in 20-some games last year to an 8-year contract, but I don't know. I think it could pay off for them for sure.
They definitely have some scoring depth. It seems.
I like Suzuki.
Yeah, Suzuki.
I think Suzuki's really good.
Drouin seems to be producing at a decent rate so far. So the Habs are definitely, I think, in the conversation to be a playoff team in the North, which is one of the most competitive divisions.
They're definitely in the conversation. I have them 6th out of 7, but that's not because I think that they'll definitely finish 6th. It's because I think, honestly, basically from 2nd through 6th, there's fluctuation there. I prefer Calgary and Edmonton in like that top 4, but I think there's a lot of wiggle room in that division with the exception of Ottawa and likely Toronto.
All right. Next up, the Nashville Predators. Smashville. They are 4-3-0. They got off to a pretty good start. I think they won their first 2 games and have lost a couple since then. Although they did defeat Chicago tonight. So,
yeah, how do you feel about them?
Nashville, I don't know.
That reaction is like...
They're kind of a team that's... I think their window might be kind of leaving a little bit.
I feel like they're one bad season away from, like, scrapping it all down and rebuilding, you know what I mean? Like,
oh, totally.
Even though they're not exactly, like, it's not like they're loaded with old players, but, like, that team that, like, 2-3 years ago was so exciting, and, you know, they made that run to the final, and then they won the President's Trophy. They're very suddenly not that caliber team anymore, and a lot of it has to do with Pekka Rinne basically just, like, leaving his prime.
Aging.
Yeah, leaving his prime quite definitively, which happens, you know, whatever. You know, guys get old. He's like 38 years old. Saros hasn't really proven that he can be a new Pekka Rinne.
Right.
You know, he's been good, just in general, but I don't know. I don't know.
Hey, and to their credit, they did go after Askarov.
Yeah.
With I think 13th pick, was it? Or
I think it was the 11th pick.
11th pick. So, I mean, they obviously recognize that they need goaltending in a few years, and so...
They picked the best goaltending prospect.
Oh, since Carey Price?
Apparently in the world. I think they're decent offensively, and, you know, Roman Josi is, I mean, reigning Norris Trophy winner, one of the best defensemen in the NHL. Exciting to watch. Scored a really good overtime winner the other night against Chicago, actually, what we were talking about with Malcolm Subban. Duchesne is such a wild card type of player. He could have like a 70-point season. He could have like a 50-point season. It's not looking
prorated.
Like yeah. It's looking like one of the more 50-point seasons so far because he's off to a slow start. But you know, they signed him to a big contract. He's got to step his game up, and he's a guy that we know he can. We know he could be a better player than that. So
they do have the worst penalty kill in the league, by the way.
It's not good
so far.
I think that was last year too. They struggled with that, didn't they? Yeah. Their special teams last year were weaknesses as well, for sure. I think the contender window is closed, and I think it's a decline from this point onward. Personally, as for this season, I have them out of the playoffs. I think I don't think they're as good as Tampa, Carolina, Dallas, Columbus. So
no, that's fair.
No.
The New Jersey Devils are up next. The Garden State. They are 3-2-1. They also have a pretty poor penalty kill through 6 games. This is a team that they definitely have some nice pieces.
Oh yeah.
And like Jack Hughes has been very good for them so far this year, and there were some kind of some question marks about Hughes. Last year, he's going into this is his 3rd year now.
Jack Hughes,
or pardon me, his 2nd year.
His 2nd year, yeah.
So yeah, there were some questions about him in his rookie year,
so far,
which wasn't entirely fair.
Yeah, well, I mean, the impression I got was that he just wasn't physically ready for the NHL. And again, I think a lot of people have shied away from that kind of analysis in this day and age because they don't want to count out smaller players, which I absolutely agree with. I don't think like being big is as important as it was. Like being fast and skilled and smart and agile is the best asset now. But you can still be not physically ready for the NHL. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's a pretty small guy. But I think I heard he gained some muscle mass this offseason. He looks good this year. Like the points show it, but also like some of the clips I've seen of him, he just looks like he's got a nose for the net, wicked wrist shot. He might just literally have what that rookie year was supposed to be. He might have that this year.
And look, there is another guy who was picked 1st overall who didn't have the most impressive rookie year, and he's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame, and that's Steven Stamkos.
Yeah.
Right? So, yeah, it's not always like a Sidney Crosby or Connor McDavid right off the bat.
Right off the bat, yeah.
So
he's a future star. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I see him. He's like a future Patrick Kane. I think, in terms of skill level. I think that's a good. High? Yeah, wow. I'd have him at that comparison. I think maybe not literally the exact same level of success in terms of points, but that's the type of player he is. Really shifty, highly skilled, good eye. high intelligence. As for the Devils themselves, they're off to a decent start. They're in a horrendous division.
Such a tough division.
They're going to get crushed in that division ultimately.
Yeah.
But I think they're gonna have a.
They may be in the same position as Buffalo, really.
Yeah, I think they'll have a fun year though. I think that there's good reason to watch them, and they've got a good future.
So the next team on the list is the New York Islanders, who are 3-3-0. So the Isles had a really good year last year. They made it to the conference final, falling to Tampa. For me, this is a team that's on the upward trajectory, and not just on the ice but off the ice as well, getting a new arena at Belmont Park next season. This is their last year. This is their last year in the Coliseum. So I think if I was an Isles fan, I'd be pretty excited by what they have right now.
I'd be excited. I'd be relieved. I don't know, just like looking forward to some stability as a franchise, and like they've got some. For the first time in a long time, and again, this dates back to 2 seasons ago because this is their 3rd season with Trotz, and I believe also their 3rd season with Lamoriello.
Seems about right.
Like, that's some serious class to actually have in your front office and on your bench, like compared to like previous seasons where they're kind of rotating through coaches. The GM was Garth Snow, former 68.
The backup
yeah,
the goalie was
former 68 overall goaltender in NHL 2000. Garth Snow, who was not a particularly.
It's disturbing that you remember that.
I do. Played that game quite a bit. But, we're talking about a team for 20 years had numbnutses in the front office. I think they had a guy briefly who was, like, committing fraud while he was in there. Or no, he owned the team fraudulently.
John Spano or something like that.
We can verify that.
And Charles Wang was quite the owner as well.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Charles.
RIP.
But, yeah, if we're just talking about the franchise, sigh of relief, new building, stability, just a new look. I think it's a very bright future for the Islanders, even if it doesn't literally mean bright future in terms of wins and cups and stuff. It's a bright
legit
future.
Star.
Yep. They lost Devon Taves in the offseason, which hurts their D a bit. A lot of what I've read has described the Isles as like, oh, they're probably not going to be quite as good this next year, but I like them too much. Like, as a team, kind of like Columbus, where I feel like they've just got their shit together structurally as a unit. Goaltending's pretty good.
Noah Dobson's quite a nice piece.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, a year and a half ago, I was talking about Dallas and the Islanders fairly similarly, how they're just a couple of stingy teams that are pretty good at just like winning games fairly consistently, or at least enough to get the job done. That's what they did last year. The Islanders were 2 wins away from the Stanley Cup final, which I'm sure was just like bonkers for Islanders fans after one playoff series victory in 20-some years. I like the Islanders. I have them kind of controversially in a playoff spot, as we will sort of discover here, because that's a loaded division, and them getting in means somebody important doesn't make it in. So,
well, and that's probably a good transition to another team in the East Division, the New York Rangers, who are at 1-4-1, have had a disappointing start to the year. So, do you think the Rangers? Do you have the Rangers being a playoff team?
No.
Yeah.
This, I wouldn't have. I don't expect them to keep this pace of losing all year, but I think they're going to fall to earth a little more this year.
Right.
I remember when I was looking up last year, they had a really solid year last year. It was fun. They had great play from Zibanejad and Panarin. They scored a lot of goals.
Heart caliber.
Yes, absolutely. Their offense was really good, but they, to literally quote my note here, defense very porous last year. Rangers ranked dead last in Corsi against last year. Relied kind of heavily on some solid goaltending from a mix of, and again, Lundqvist had his struggles last year, but he was there and he kept it together, along with Shesterkin and Georgiev. It's almost it's like the Vancouver Canucks, but to an extreme level, where they were just like one of the worst defensive teams in the NHL, but found a way to keep winning games anyway because they just kept scoring goals. So I would have them out of the playoffs this year, and I think they're falling to earth a bit. Again, though, steady rise up. They one of the most efficient rebuilds I think the NHL
and
has seen.
It doesn't hurt to make the playoffs and also get the first overall pick.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, Alexis Lafreniere,
who has 0 points through 6 games.
He's Jack Hughesing a little bit right now, unfortunately.
Right. Well, just as we talked about, right? Like, It's not the end of the world. I think Taylor Hall took 10 games to get his first goal.
Yeah,
and
if I'm a Rangers fan, I'm not going to be concerned about Lafreniere.
Especially after he hasn't played for, 9 months?
Yeah.
10 months?
We could probably do a whole video on the junior hockey fiasco right now.
Right.
I think they're going to... I mean, again, we're talking about a team that made the playoffs, I think, in 2017, made it the second round, and then after that promptly started losing, and then they've already basically... They're a good chunk of the way through the rebuild already. It's one of the fastest rebuilds I've ever seen.
And it must be noted, lost one of their greatest players in franchise history this offseason, Henrik Lundqvist, to the Washington Capitals for about a week and a half.
The identity of this team is totally different.
Completely different.
New era.
So, talking about another rebuilding team at 1-5-1, the Ottawa Senators.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sens, I mean, of course, we know they're going to miss the playoffs this year.
Yeah.
In all likelihood, finish last in the division. But I think there's a lot of optimism in Ottawa. Their future looks really bright. They have a lot of really nice pieces. So and even though they are 1-5-1, they have been in several. I mean, obviously they got beaten pretty handily by the Canucks the last 2 nights, but they have been in some of the games and just kind of fallen apart.
Well, even
at the end of it,
even tonight they lost the Canucks 5-1, but they that first period they were dominating
they were,
and then they just
outshot the Canucks like 24-7 or something.
It was bad. It was literally tied a franchise record, I believe, for shots in period. And I was about to just die on the spot because I was like, oh Christ. But anyway, they just couldn't keep it up in that game. I'm surprised they're starting as poorly as they are. I think partly because I'm surprised that Matt. I kind of had faith. I still do because it's still early. I have faith that Matt Murray's going to kind of turn it around. I think that was a good pickup for them. He's not off to a good start. Hopefully this isn't the new normal for him. He's kind of picking up where he left off last year, where he I believe had an .899 save percentage with the Penguins. If he continues to play not so well, then this is going to be pretty rough, regardless of how competitive they are and how good guys like Tim Stützle play, and Thomas Chabot and Tkachuk. Future team, probably last in the division, I'd say. You'd be making a good guess if you guessed that they would finish last. I think that's expected.
The odds-on favorite to finish last. Yeah. So the Philadelphia Flyers are the next team that are on our list. They are 4-2-1. I believe both of their losses have come against Boston. It's the big thing for me. And they are 4-2-1. Carter Hart hasn't had a great start to the year, but I expect that he's going to rebound from that. Yeah. I think he's in the Vezina conversation.
I mean,
if not this year, then in the next few years.
I mean, they have to be thrilled that they've just suddenly got a goalie
at 22.
You know what I mean? Yeah, they've got like a guy. They finally have their piece. They have their goalie after, over 30 years since like Ron Hextall was their starter. They'll have a stable starting.
They've been a goalie graveyard,
one after the other. If it wasn't somebody that was supposed to be good and didn't turn out to be, it was guys that were never expected to be good and were just there to like fill a spot. What was it? 2 years ago they used like 6 goalies.
Well, and even when they went to the Cup final in 2010
with Michael
Leighton and
Brian Boucher.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Suddenly, too, starting this past season, they are a contending team. Which, if you asked me a year and a half ago, I would have said, like, hey, great, they have Alain Vigneault. That's cool. I like Vigneault. Obviously, I think he's a good coach. But I would have said, like, maybe they'll figure some stuff out. But no, they're a contender now. They're, like, considered, like, a top 5 team in the NHL. Just, like, suddenly.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah. And they, honestly, they have the chops to back that up. Good goalie. They have a really solid top 6. Giroux, Voracek, Konechny. I think Joel Farabee's in there as well. And they added Gustafsson.
Farabee's had a good start, actually, to the year.
They added Gustafsson in the offseason, who, that was a really good pickup for them, in my opinion.
So you have them...
I have them in the playoffs for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of the division, I would have them behind Boston currently. And again, we talked about Boston already. Part of me, I just want to give like some like sort of reigning best team in conference division respect to Boston and have them be the presumed first place team until somebody else proves otherwise.
Kevin Hayes has also had a good start to the year.
Yeah, he's a good player. He's a good player. He signed that big contract, but he's a good player.
So, next team up is the crossed cross-state rivals, the Pittsburgh Penguins, who are also 4-2-1. Been an interesting start for them. Interesting offseason too, losing or letting Matt Murray go in free agency, and kind of putting a lot of trust in Tristan Jarry, who hasn't been particularly good to start the year. But what do you think about that move?
I don't know if Jarry and DeSmith are the answer for them in net. I mean, the Penguins are an enigma in my opinion, because like, again, 4-2-1, pretty good start, but they've had some problems. They did not start the season so well. 4-2-1 means that they've won kind of more recently. Malkin has like 3 or 4 points or something like that, which isn't very promising. I mean, this is kind of carrying off where they left last year, where it's like, hey, this is a good team that wins games, but like, what's going on here? Are you guys actually able to win another cup? I don't know. Like, it's hard to imagine this team not succeeding with Crosby and Malkin in the lineup. You have to think at some point this team's going to like miss the playoffs or something.
Right, you'd think so.
Eventually, right? Like,
they also did lose Justin Schultz as well.
Right. I don't know. Yeah, the thing is, I put them in the playoffs in my prediction here. This division is just so messed up, though. Like, I don't know. Like, they could finish second or third. They could also, honestly, they could slip out 5th, 6th.
You think as low as 6th?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Like, I really don't know what to think of Pittsburgh. I don't know what to make of them this
They
year.
are kind of a toss-up in a lot of ways. So
it's just hard to envision them not succeeding, because like Crosby, we're so used to seeing them win games with Crosby and Malkin, but we'll see what happens there. I don't know what to make of them. If they make the playoffs, I don't expect them to go far. I'll say that.
So next team are the 2019 Stanley Cup champion, St. Louis Blues. So St. Louis is one of those 3 teams in the kind of 3-headed monster, I think, in the West. They're pretty obviously going to be a playoff team.
Yes.
They are 4-2-1 right now. So yeah, the Blues, I mean, they're kind of in a window right now. They're kind of in a Stanley Cup contending point in their history. And yeah, what do you think? Where do you have the Blues projected?
I think I had them 3rd in the division. Yeah, I'll stand by that. Like, I was going to say that, they're in that top 3, but I put them 3rd. I think Vegas and Colorado are better than both of them. I think, unfortunately, St. Louis is going to have to play one of those 2 teams in the first round, and, someone's got to lose that series. But on their own, in a vacuum, St. Louis Blues are just as good as they were last year, in my opinion. They lost Pietrangelo, replaced that with Krug in terms of offensive production. I mean, they didn't lose any offensive production. Pietrangelo was their captain, so that's it's still a huge loss. But I like the Blues. I like that team. They definitely, when they lost the Canucks in the first round, that shouldn't have happened. Binnington, I think, played a bit of a role in that, and they're obviously, they've told him, you're our guy, prove it, don't prove it rather, but like, I'm gonna rephrase that.
Continue being the guy.
Yeah, you're our guy.
Who you were in 2019.
Yeah, so we expect you to be that guy again, because there's no one else. We've let Allen go, so so far he's been pretty good.
Here's looking at you, kid.
Yeah, exactly. Because he wasn't great last year, honestly, in general. I kept seeing him in like best goalies in the league rankings, but his stats were pretty mediocre. And then the playoffs, he was terrible. So he needs to change that this year. But yeah, I still think that structurally that they're really good. Yeah, what do you think about them?
Well, it's like you said, it's going to be interesting what happens once they get into the playoffs, right? Because they're going to have to play Vegas or Colorado, probably. Right? So someone's going to be disappointed.
Yeah.
Right? All 3 of those teams have cup aspirations, and
one of
them pretty early is going to be disappointed. So
yeah, the heart's going to get broken.
Luckily for the Blues, they do have the cup under their belt from a couple of years ago. So, and not only does that make it, not that necessarily makes it easier to stomach a loss, but they do have that to fall back on, and they also have a lot of playoff experience too.
Yes, yeah, I like them. I like their chances.
So another team in the West is the San Jose Sharks. This will round off the California teams.
Yeah,
and the Sharks are kind of in a weird spot in that they're not projected to be a playoff team, I don't think, but also at the same time they've got a lot of really nice pieces they're aging though, right? And there's a lot of money tied into guys who aren't going to be big contributors in the years to come, I think.
So San Jose is a team that out of nowhere shit the bed, laid a huge egg last year, and was otherwise structurally designed to continue to be a contender. Right. I don't think last year... I don't expect them to be as bad as last year. I don't think they should have been as bad as they were last year. I think a number of their younger assets underperformed. Hurdle was pretty solid, but I think he was hurt for a portion of last season. But I know that Timo Meier and Kevin Labanc both kind of underachieved last year. I still have faith in Erik Karlsson bouncing back,
right.
If he can stay healthy. Their goaltending, though, man, Jones has 2 years in a row been pretty bad. And then they added Dubnyk, who was honestly probably one of the worst goalies in the league last year. And I say that because the stats were bad, but also I think Minnesota was pretty good at preventing dangerous scoring chances. And they were actually a decent defensive team. And despite that, Dubnyk had one of the worst seasons of his career last year. And I mean, Dubnyk's not a young man, so age may play into that a little bit. Their goaltending is a huge weakness. It has to go against what's expected of them. They're expected to be bad. They've been bad this year so far. They have to somehow reverse that between the two of them. So I don't know. I don't have them in the playoffs in my prediction. They could though. It's a short season. If they go on a little stretch of success, they could find a way to squeeze in.
Should also point out that the San Jose Sharks are playing in Arizona as the 49ers did.
So that's not good for team morale. Anyway, I don't have them making the playoffs. They could be a surprise. I don't. They're not a faithful dark horse of mine, though.
I have them out of the playoffs.
Yeah.
Next team we have is the defending Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning, who've started the season 3-1-0. I think obviously the biggest issue for them going into the season was Kucherov being injured. So, is that going to stop them, though? No. I mean, they won a Stanley Cup without Steven Stamkos.
They're hoping he's back for the playoffs.
Yeah.
If Kucherov's back for the playoffs, this is my final pick.
Right.
My prediction was it's Colorado and Tampa Bay.
That's what I said too. Which again, not exactly going off the board, but there's just such strong teams.
Tampa's it's the same team as last year, and people, they can point to obviously because it happens again and again. The Stanley Cup hangover. Teams have it's hard to repeat. It is really, really hard to repeat in the NHL, and that's literally the only thing working against the Tampa Bay Lightning is the sort of magical expectation that they won't be able to do it again because they are totally built to do it again, and it's not even like an old core. It's like. Kucherov's hurt, but he's 26. Braden Point's 24. Stamkos is 30
Stamkos
now.
Stamkos is the gray beard.
Yeah. And I mean, his health is obviously a concern, but he's healthy now. And Vasilevsky is the best goalie in the NHL.
Hedman might be the best defenseman in the NHL.
And after Hedman, they have Sergachev and McDonough. That's your top three defense right there.
This is ridiculous.
It's absurd. And they have scoring all through the lineup. They couldn't get rid of Tyler Johnson, but they have him, and he's a pretty good player as a depth piece. So,
right.
This is a guy who when he gets first line minutes, puts up 50 to 60 points. He's not. He's getting third and fourth line minutes, and he puts up 40 points or whatever. And it's just what's wrong with that?
So you have Tampa pretty easily winning
that division. Winning that division.
Going away.
I don't have them necessarily winning the cup, but I'm expecting them to get to at least the third round, and my prediction is the final. So. Yeah, it's a great team. This is maybe the great team of our time.
This is the time for them to really do a lot.
Be an all-time team. Be an all-time team. If they can win the cup this year, this is the legendary Tampa Bay Lightning team, basically. Because that's in this day and age, winning back-to-back cups is the Penguins did it, and that's as good as it gets in terms of quote
Seems
unquote.
like it.
Yeah, dynasties these days. Yes, they're built to win. They'll keep winning.
Okay, so from one team that has won a Stanley Cup to a team that's looking for their first playoff win in 16 years.
Playoff series win.
Yeah. The Toronto Maple Leafs, who are at the top of the North Division right now, 6-2-0. So after a really hot start, they're a team that they have to have playoff success. They've had a lot of regular season success. They have a lot of players doing really well in the regular season, putting up great numbers. They have lost in the first round or the play-in round every single year for 4 years in a row.
This team has to win a series. If they don't win a series, people are getting fired.
You can go anywhere to talk about the Leafs, by the way. So maybe we'll try not to talk about them for too long, because you can literally go anywhere and talk about them and find people who will talk about them for hours.
There are shows that are devoted to talking about the Leafs.
Yeah, like Sportsnet.
Like the existence of TSN.
Yeah. Sorry, all of Canada's media, basically. But obviously they are very much worth talking about. This is a team that has been built to win. Like, I have a hard time, like, there have been some salary related issues, but in terms of the team that's been put on the board, it's hard to fault Dubas for assembling a really good team, you know. And they've drafted some good players. They've drafted high. This team should be winning. They really should be winning.
He has assembled, on paper, a really good team.
Yes.
A very, very top-heavy team.
Yes. Oh, definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
I mean, when you have... I mean, it's been said a million times, but you got $40 million tied into 4 forwards, right? Those guys have to come through for you.
Yeah.
Right? It's okay, you know, the boys signed the big deals. That's all well and good, but they have to produce, right? And I think they will make the playoffs pretty easily, I would say, or whether it's first, second, third, whatever, they'll get in. And hey, guess what? They don't have to play Boston until at least the third round, right? So, and I say that half jokingly, but you know, that's kind of been their kryptonite. Columbus beat them last year, of course, but so who knows? Maybe this is what they need. Maybe they need to play Montreal or Calgary or Edmonton in the first round, and
get a 7-game series too. I'm sure that
of course
they'll appreciate that as well. I have them winning the division. I think they're the best team in the
division.
division.
I do as well, actually. I have them winning the division.
Freddie Anderson takes a lot of heat, but he is a good goalie. He didn't have a great year last year. He had a really good playoff, though, in those 5 games. He wasn't the reason why they lost. I like Frederik Anderson. There are 4 billion Leafs fans that say whatever they want to say, but I think he's a good goalie. I don't think that's a problem for them. Matthews is a game breaker. He needs to be a game breaker in the playoffs. This is a guy, he can score at will. He's got a wicked release. He's probably the closest thing to Ovechkin we're going to have when Ovechkin is gone, like when he's not in the NHL anymore. Like, Matthews is a guy who can pop 50 goals easily every year, in my opinion. He's got to bring that same fire in the playoffs for sure. Anyway, yeah, we'll see what happens with them, but they've got to win a playoff series. That's at the very least. Next up, we have the Vancouver Canucks. Off to a weird start this season, to say the very least. They're up to 4-5-0 now, which is nice, because it was 2-5-0 a couple of days ago. Then Ottawa came along and seems to be solving that problem.
Thanks, Sens.
Thanks a lot, Sens. But yeah, what was your thoughts on Vancouver going into this season?
Going into the season, I had them 5th in the division. I thought they would regress a little bit. They lost about a third of their roster, as I mentioned. Not quite that much, but they lost a lot of...
They diaspora'd to Calgary.
Yeah. And the biggest question mark for me was, what is the Demko Holtby tandem going to look like? Obviously, after losing Markstrom. I really, really liked the Nate Schmidt trade.
Yeah, me too.
I think that he's a fantastic defenseman. So that's going to be an important piece for them. But yeah, overall, I thought probably a little bit of regression. I think that there were Canuck fans who maybe had too high of hopes after the great playoff run they went on. Which, like, hey, full credit to them. They won the series that they needed to, and they went to Game 7 of the second round and everything. But I think that might have the perspectives of some Canuck fans might have been a little bit off because of that. I mean, this is a team that might have missed the playoffs had it been an 82-game season. Right?
Again, this is a team that was ultimately, I think, from a win-loss perspective, grateful for the break in the season, because I remember distinctly how they were playing in those last couple of weeks before the season paused, and it wasn't good. They did not look good. They looked like they were about to go into a big losing streak.
Markstrom was injured.
Markstrom was hurt, yeah. Demko was doing what he could, and again, it's a recurring theme with Demko. The team gives up a lot of shots when he plays in net. They gave up a lot of shots in general, but especially when Demko plays. If you look through his game log last year, you can include the Vegas games in that for sure. He faced 120 shots in like 2 games plus a little bit of relief in a game that Markstrom got pulled, which I think was game 1 of that series. But anyway, Yeah, I agree. I think that they're either, when it's all said and done, they're either going to be the same or a little worse. Just because last year was a little rosy, opportunistic team that gives up a lot of offensive chances, relied night in and night out on the goaltending to kind of bail them out when the D wasn't quite there for them. Pretty good offensively, obviously. If their power play isn't clicking, as was demonstrated in the first few games of this season, then the team's not clicking.
And one of the things that I find the biggest issues with the Canucks so far this season is the amount of shots they give up. It's over 37 shots.
Yeah, that feels about right. It's been absurd.
When you have a young goalie like Thatcher Demko in net, facing that amount of shots per game, a lot of them from like high danger areas, it's going to be a little discouraging.
It's bad. And that can't go on. Nolan Baumgartner and Green have to find a way to get the defense clicking, because it's bad. It's really bad. And it's not just statistical. If you watch the games, they're failing the eye test.
Yeah, the eye test is...
It's bad.
Apart from the last two games against Ottawa. But even the first period tonight, as we mentioned...
First period tonight was a disaster, and they were lucky they got out of it in a 1-1 tie. Demko was outstanding tonight. He started his second consecutive game. It's the first time this year that they haven't split back and forth between Holtby and Demko. I think it's because against Ottawa in that first game, Demko played really well. It was the first really, really good goaltending performance of the year, and I think it was smart. Green saw that, and he's like, well, let's put him in again. And Holtby might start the next one, just in terms of like balancing the goaltender's play. But it's just, even against Ottawa though, the problem for Vancouver this season so far has been the turnovers. If you really boil it down to something really simple, it's just like entering the neutral zone, stumbling, fumbling a pass, and then suddenly the other team's coming up with a full head of speed on an odd man rush or 2-on-0 or a breakaway. I don't know. Anyway, like Pettersson seemed to figure some stuff out tonight. He had a couple of points. Team's hopefully going to get its mojo back, reduce the shots against a little bit. I have them at 4th, but again, like I said with the North Division, 2nd through 6th is a bit of a toss-up. Montreal at 6th, like I said, is pretty harsh because I don't think that they're quite that. I don't think they're not that bad. I think they're a solid team. So I wouldn't be surprised if Vancouver missed the playoffs. They might squeak in.
There's going to be 2 teams in Canada that are disappointed, I think. Mm-hmm. Okay, so from Van City, we go to Sin City. The Vegas Golden Knights, who are off to a hot start at 5-1-1. This is a team that I think is in the conversation as well for contending for a Stanley Cup. They have a lot of really nice assets. And Marc-Andre Fleury, who there's been a lot of question marks surrounding, has also got off to a pretty nice start. And Leonard hasn't been particularly great. Could there be a goaltending controversy?
I think so. There was one by default. I think it's nothing but good things for the Knights, though, if those two are pushing each other.
Absolutely.
I think Leonard's really good. We've talked before about how it's kind of unbelievable that Leonard's only now, and even now, he's splitting with Fleury, but this is a guy who should be somebody's starter somewhere, right?
Right. And he was signed as a starter.
Yes, he was. I don't know. The Knights have spent every penny up to the cap, basically. As the team is loaded. Mark Stone is a terrific choice for captain.
Fantastic.
I criticize the
team
Knights
through 7 games. He has 11 points.
Yeah, which is, that's above and beyond what he normally does. So he's taking it to the next level. I criticize the Knights for not naming a captain. I am glad they waited for Stone because I think he's a great choice for captain, and he's that's such a great player to build your team around. These friggin' Knights, they just step into the league and they've got all this talent, and now they've got Pietrangelo.
And Pietrangelo, but I think one of the people on their decor that doesn't get talked about enough is Shea Theodore. He's one of the better defensemen in the NHL.
He's got 7 points in 7 games. I checked today, which is a really good start. But this is a complete defenseman. I remember I was watching clips of him. He is... it was just a clip of him dancing around on the blue line where he's got the puck and the forward's checking him, and he's just going left, right, gets a shot opening, takes it. This guy is a star. It's not really out of nowhere, but...
He was a good prospect on the Ducks, right?
Well, they let him go.
I know.
Yeah, no, I mean, Pietrangelo is a great experienced guy you've brought in, and then Theodore is, he's not super young. He's like 24, 25. I think he's 25. He's a 95er, I think. Spectacular player. It's a great team.
They did lose Schmidt.
They lost Schmidt, which was necessary for them from a cap perspective. That was controversial, too.
Or they had to lose somebody.
They had to lose somebody, and, there was buzz the team was unhappy with the choice to bring in Pietrangelo given the salary cap circumstance, and Schmidt, I'm sure he wasn't thrilled because he felt he had been committed to by Vegas and then had to be moved. Well, Vegas it is what it is now.
That is a thing that has come up with the Golden Knights, is that they've signed guys to these contracts that don't have no movement clauses, right? And the guys take a little bit less money. They want to be on a competitive team. There's also no state tax in Nevada, which is nice.
It's kind of like Florida.
And Tennessee. And then they get traded.
Yeah.
Right? And Nate Schmidt, it's happened to a few guys, and Nate Schmidt is the most recent one. So it's maybe guys are a little more hesitant to sign with Vegas, knowing that how quickly, because they've traded guys.
Well, going forward, for now it doesn't matter.
Of course.
There were rumors that they're going to move Pacioretty, which is still, I'm sure, a possibility throughout this season. He's rediscovered himself on the team, though. So either they'll keep him and he'll continue to produce, or they'll move him for, I'm sure, some good pieces. But yeah, they're absolutely a contender. If not for Colorado being who they are, this would be my pick in this division, and they would be my Cup finalists for sure as
right?
well. Yeah. The only reason they're not is because Colorado's in there too, and that means that nobody but Colorado, if I'm predicting Colorado to go to the final, no one else can make it past the second round in that division. So it's kind of unfortunate. Again, some hearts are going to be broken, but Vegas is a really good team regardless. Okay,
so speaking of broken hearts, why don't we move on to the team that broke Vegas's heart in the 2018 Cup final? That is, of course, the Washington Capitals, who are off to an impressive start this year at 4-0-3. But they have lost, and I think this is the most interesting story about them so far, 4 players from the motherland due to COVID protocols. Ovechkin, Samsonov, Orlov, and Kuznetsov. So Russian machine never breaks, but it does get delayed due to COVID protocols. So the Caps are kind of... I think they are trending towards more of a playoff team than not. But I think you had them out of the playoffs.
Well, not that I literally predict them to miss, but it's just getting crowded in that division. Like somebody's got to pop out if somebody's going in, and like basically in my division projections, I spent a long time staring at that and thinking about who I'm pulling out to put in, because I feel like the Rangers, the Sabres, and the Devils are out, like as a given.
And it should be noted that 4 of Washington's victories came at the expense of the Buffalo Sabres.
Yes, the Buffalo Sabres, the East Division's Ottawa Senators. But I don't want to pull the Islanders out. Like, I do not want to pull the Islanders out of my top 4, which means I have to pull Pittsburgh out or Washington out, basically, in terms of my predictions. I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, with Washington, I feel like they're a little more stable in terms of, like the Penguins are a bit of a toss-up. They may be entering this weird state where they become a non-playoff team fairly soon. The Capitals, though, I feel like are a little better than the Penguins, but I'm not really sure. I don't know.
They do have probably the best offensive defenseman in the NHL, and John Carlson.
John Carlson's really good. Yeah, I mean, I still like that team. I don't...
And they also added Justin Schultz to that blue line.
Yeah, that helps for sure, in terms of production at least.
I think the goaltending is the biggest question mark for the Caps right after losing Holtby, who I think both parties probably knew was...
Yeah, that was coming for sure.
It was the time to move on.
But they don't have a lot of games played in that net. Like,
no, there's a serious lack of experience.
Exactly. They have Samsonov, and Vitek Vanacek has stepped in with Samsonov absent. Vanacek's been solid. Again, never heard of this guy until this year. I don't even know where he ranks within Washington's system.
He's 25 years old.
So it's older than you'd expect of a guy who doesn't have a ton of clout in terms of like people being aware of him.
He was a second round pick.
Interesting.
Yeah, I to be honest, I haven't really followed him that closely. Yeah.
But he's off to a solid start, which is great. That's great for his career prospects if he can keep up that play. And when Samsonov returns, if they're both solid, that's good for the Capitals. In terms of their playoff success, I
I figure first or second round exit. That seems to be what they're leaning towards these days. Maybe it depends on who they face, where they finish in the division. I like Boston and Philadelphia in that division as like coming out of the first round.
I think Washington might sneak into the 4th spot in that division. And anything can happen in the playoffs, but you have to figure if they're going up against Boston, they're probably going to lose. Or are they more likely than not?
Yeah, I mean, they're not compared to Boston, they're not up and coming or anything. They're kind of similar to Boston in that their core of good players is up, older. So, and I think Boston's a much better team in terms of like depth, and kind of like with Tampa Bay where they have good players everywhere. Washington is a little more sparse, So yeah.
Okay, so for the 31st NHL team on this list, last but not least, let's take a trip down Portage Ave and look at the 5-2-0 Winnipeg Jets, who are going to be getting a bit of a facelift hopefully soon when they add Pierre-Luc Dubois to their roster. We already spoke from kind of Columbus's perspective about that trade.
Yeah.
So what do you think about the trade from Winnipeg's perspective? Because I'm a big Pierre-Luc Dubois fan. I think he's going to slot in really nicely behind Scheifele on that second line.
It's a really good second line center to have. I think Laine has, I mean, you can factor Roslovic into that trade as well, I suppose. Laine is generating more numbers right now, but clearly a change needed to happen. I think Laine wanted out. There's been weird stuff going on with him in Winnipeg for a couple of years. So regardless of like whether or not Winnipeg's getting the exact equivalent skilled player in the deal, it's a deal that kind of had to happen, and they get a really good player who's ready to play right now, as opposed to like some future considerations or anything like that, like a draft pick or whatever. They have a guy they have Pierre-Luc Dubois who's
just entering his prime.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose like he was a little disappointing last year in terms of like sort of his progression, but I don't know, he's going to get a good chance in Winnipeg. The Jets are on the verge of being kind of like a sad story in terms of like they were like built to contend. They were ready to go the distance in 2018 and then ran into the Knights, basically ran into Marc-Andre Fleury, maybe more accurately. And then they've just kind of like declined since then. Like everyone was going on about how deep Winnipeg is, and I mean they're off to a good start. They have Connor Hellebuyck in net. Nothing wrong with that. They're just thin on their D-core. Losing Bufflin really hurt them.
Well, you've been talking about that 2018 team, that was only 3 years ago. And look at all the defensemen from that team that they have since lost, right?
Trouba,
Myers
Bufflin,
isn't there. Trouba.
Myers.
So
like they have Morrissey.
Right.
They also have Pionk, I think, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's not bad. But like again, they don't. It's not quite that strong playoff built D-core that they had a couple years ago. In terms of the division, though, I have them out of the top 4, but I mean, I think they're a better team than the Canucks. I had the Canucks ahead of them at the start of this, but not out of like a definite thought that Vancouver was better. I think Winnipeg's a better team than Vancouver. Certainly more stable.
Ehlers has been excellent too, I have to say.
Yes, he has.
To start off this year.
There was, I'm sure for the last couple of years, there was some thoughts that he'd kind of like leveled off as like a 60-point pace type of guy, but 11 points in 7 games?
Yeah.
8 games?
And
that's really good.
Again, caveat, 5 wins, but 3 of them have been against the Ottawa Senators. I'm sorry. It needs to be brought up.
Oh.
Perspective here, folks. But no, it is a good start. It is a good start for the Jets.
Yeah, I mean, you still got to win those games, right?
Hey,
I mean, if they lost those games, they'd be like they're losing to Ottawa.
Yeah,
so,
they have to win.
Yeah,
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're a decent team. I don't see them going far in the playoffs. Maybe if Hellebuyck continues to play really well, builds off of his Vezina win last year. He wasn't great for them in the playoffs, but I don't know. That's a guy that could be like an X factor for them.
Oh, totally,
sure.
totally.
And they score a decent amount of goals.
And Scheifele's no slouch.
Scheifele's really good. And Wheeler is getting old, but like I don't know, I've been a big Wheeler fan for 4 or 5 years now. And he's not maybe going to be a 90-point guy ever again, but that's a great captain that they have there, and hopefully they can make that work.
And don't forget about Kyle Connor too.
Yes. Kyle Connor, who's kind of been what Laine was supposed to be, I guess.
In a sense.
Yeah. Even though, not that Laine was like, I mean, he really had 3 really good seasons in Winnipeg. And honestly, he's played 1 game this year and he had 3 points. So, like, it's not like he was off to a bad start.
Including an overtime winner.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, I still think Laine is going to be a 40-goal guy. But Connor has proven to be more consistent. So
he had 38 goals last year.
I think he's got
71
I think he already has 3 30-goal seasons under his belt.
He does.
And he's off to a good start this year, too. So,
That's a really
yeah.
good pick.
Yeah.
Okay, so that about rounds it out. Oh, I have to say, at the 32nd team with the worst arena name in the National Hockey League, the Seattle Kraken, are going to play at Climate Pledge Arena. It needs to be said, that has to be the worst arena name in sports history.
It's pretty based. It's fits the bill for Seattle, I'd say, in terms of
so that's
the
something.
tone.
That's something that we will be looking at down the line. That was the Kraken and what they can add.
Well, we could do a whole video
draft.
projecting their roster.
Absolutely.
I mean, that'd be easy enough to do. We just have to look at which players are likely to be exposed and who Seattle would likely take. I guess it'd be hard to like nail down the salary cap aspect of that, but
The expansion draft, I think a year ago, I would have said teams are going to be so safe compared to what happened with Vegas. They're going to be so cautious about who they give up and what type of trades they're going to be making. The trades is the biggest thing, right? But now with the cap being flat for a few years,
They're going to let guys go.
they're going to let guys go, and it's going to be interesting to see what Francis does with that
Yeah,
team.
it's exciting.
All right, so that about does it for this season preview and kind of look at the league 2 weeks into the season. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening to the first episode of Hockey Talkies. I am Taylor,
I'm Hunter.
and we will see you next time.